Hi, my name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance. And we're an education and outreach group committed to educating folks on the benefits of what we call total quality management for people, a strategic and systematic approach to harmonizing the interests of all your stakeholders in your common purpose, goals, and objectives. And as part of our commitment, we do a lot of free things like education. And what better education than to hear from people at the front lines of this concept of creating value, making money by creating value instead of extracting value. And I don't think there's a better person we can have to discuss this than Jay Jakub. He's executive director of the Economics of Mutuality Foundation. You're going to hear about them obviously in this show. They were founded originally by Mars. This is a very, very well-connected organization, and I think they're among the best positioned to promote these concepts around the world, and we're going to hear about that. So you can see they're all about leading with purpose, the strategic approach to value creation rather than extraction. And I love the fact, and we'll talk a little bit about this, Jay, that you've taken on loneliness. Heck, you know, I think that I have actually worked for companies where the companies were the source of people's soul community and that they lived for going to their work. So let's make some time for that. So, what we're going to accomplish today, folks, before I give this one last advertisement for the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, again, we are committed to the same principles. We use different terminology, but we're committed to the same principles of mutuality, creating value by aligning the interests of all stakeholders. We give away a ton of information, and so does Jay's organization because he's not charging us for his valuable time today. So we give away pardon me, we don't give away everything, but we got a lot of good information if you want help on that. So I'm going to now stop this share. And Jay, thank you personally once again for taking your valuable time. And as I said, we're going to get to a lot of things, but let's first start with what the purpose, goals, and objectives are of your foundation.
Sure. First, I'd like to just thank you, Bruce, for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience and to you personally, because I've been following also the work that you've been doing for some time now. And as you reminded me before we started this interview, we've been talking since long before COVID. So I
Mhm.
admire that you've been in the stakeholder capitalism space long before it was called that. So that's a great thing. So I work for something called the Economics of Mutuality Foundation, as Bruce pointed out, and our objective really is to transform business for the common good, but in ways that are good for business and that can actually scale. Because ultimately, if you can't scale what it is your solution is, you're not going to be transformational. And what we're trying to do now is not to put band-aids on cuts for businesses, but actually help reorient them and equip them to actually drive their business activities in such a way where they're co-creating significantly more value that's holistic, that's useful for stakeholders as well as for shareholders, and where you can actually reduce, if not remove entirely, the perceived trade-off between giving up some profit for doing some good for people, community, planet, but in ways that rarely scale, if ever, and actually being able to see how measurable um, value creation that we call mutual value creation, that I know we'll talk about a little bit later, can actually deliver substantially more traditional value for your top and bottom line, as well as healing broken relationships between business and people, between business and communities and the planet. And you can actually do much better and be more resilient operating this way, more purpose driven.
So I'm going to stop right now. So for those folks who have tried to conflate the concept of mutuality or shared value or stakeholder capitalism with some notion that you're taking money from shareholders to line the pockets of some pet, project of owners is just completely false. It was fabricated, I think, Jay, as a result of the virtue signaling that happened after the Business Roundtable pronouncement, so it became attacked as a form of virtual signaling. So, Jay, I think number one, the headline here, it's a focus on value creation, except that it's win-win value creation. So tell us a little bit more. I'm very familiar, as you know, with the Mars organization, having close family friends who worked there and loved it. Um, where did this come from, this concept of mutuality, and how did it come out of Mars?
Actually, I've worked for Mars for almost 14 years in the global headquarters, so I got exposed to a lot of the family history by being exposed to the leadership team, but also members of the Mars family. some of whom got very interested in what it is we're doing, one of whom remains the chairman of the board of our organization, even though we're outside of Mars now. And actually, his name is Stephen Badger, the son of Jackie Mars. And Stephen's uncle, John Mars, who leads one of the other branches of the family, years ago, when we first started this work, actually the prompter within inside Mars that caused us to embark on this work as the internal think tank of that company, family owned, privately held, makers of things like M&Ms and a lot of iconic brands. And for a lot of the pet foods that your audience may feed to their dogs and cats, they all seem to be owned by Mars for some reason. But John Mars asked his CEO a question at the end of 2006, just as I was joining the company for its internal think tank. He asked a question shareholders never ask under Milton Friedman's Chicago School of Business Financial Capitalism that was lasting the prior 50 years, which is what should the right level of profit be for the company? And interestingly, shareholders, of course, under financial capitalism, they think they know the answer, which is as much as you can possibly squeeze out of the value chain. But we both know that that's not the case. And I think John intuitively believed that there was an optimum level of profit above which, if the company started to squeeze its value chain partners, that they would start to squeeze one another if it took too much out of the value chain. And this squeezing effect would go down the value chain and would cause a disequilibrium that would then disadvantage the company by taking too much. But you would never see it coming because why would you? You're just
That's
focusing
not on the
on
balance sheets.
right. You're focusing on your profit maximization. You only value financial capitalism only values one form of capital among four forms of capital that exist, which we can talk about more if you're interested in a little bit. And so you're very limited to the value that's inherent in that one form of capital, which is money, and you leave on the table lots of other forms of value. And interestingly, being an internal think tank with a mandate that was to deliver something that was transformational for the business every time. We had to have a failure metric in this organization. So if we didn't fail enough by not taking enough risk to be transformational, then we would get penalized in our bonus. So it gave us the freedom to take on a big question like what's the right level of profit?
And
And
let's stop for 1 second because I
yep,
want to underline this, folks. This is a really important point. In other words, um, an investor wants to get a premium over what they can get from the bank, and they want to get a premium over what they can get from an investment and a very safe investment. So that's clear. So, Jay, can you talk a little bit more about this? Because I think it's a critical issue.
definitely. I said at the beginning that what if businesses actually could be more profitable, more resilient, have more growth potential by doing good in ways that are measurable and can be managed across different forms of value, different forms of capital, social capital, human capital, natural capital, as well as financial capital, and they could actually do better by doing more good rather than just trying to take from everyone else. So I look at this as kind of a disruptive innovation, which is maybe a little bit different than TQM, which we have a lot in common with. I know you're very familiar with that, of course, as well, something that you have pioneered yourself. But rather than being a form of continuous improvement, that form of innovation, this is more of something that really disrupts the way you think about how you do business. So we start with an ecosystem around the company and its purpose. And actually, companies don't tend to think about ecosystems as being around their purpose. They look at it as being around their profit and their shareholders and how much they can extract from their value chain partners and keep for themselves and give to their shareholders. Well, we're trying to kind of turn that thinking on its head and say, okay, let's think about decentering the company and actually putting purpose that's deliverable as strategy, solving some external problem for somebody else that is the real reason your company exists. And I like to say that the purpose of business is not to create profit, and I try to do that to shock the audience, especially if they're CEOs hearing the first time. A great friend of ours named Colin Mayer, one of the founding deans of Oxford's Business School, longtime partner, he used to say, the purpose of business is not to make profit. That's the kind of fuel that goes into the engine. It's essential for business, but the purpose of business is to create profitable solutions for people, place, and planet. It's
Yep.
not to create profit by creating problems for people, place, and planet. Well, that's our starting point. And
Great.
I'm a kind of historian by personal interest and academic training long ago. And I like to think back to a 16th century astronomer named Copernicus, Polish Nicholas Copernicus. And yeah, he had this idea that the center of the universe is not, that the planets don't revolve around the Earth. which was the common belief at that time. They actually revolve around the sun. And this was very heretical, and it was hard for people to understand and believe. But once they did, they realized, okay, all the mathematics of the universe makes sense now. Well, similarly, when you have the universe of stakeholders that are circling the profit and the company, then it's almost like you've got the earth at the center of your universe, and it doesn't work that way. If you've got purpose at the center, a shared purpose that brings the stakeholders together, that enlarges the opportunities for value creation by having more stakeholders there to help you deliver what you say the purpose of your company is, then it's like you've centered the right thing, and you have the right lens to populate and map out the right stakeholders that the company needs to deliver the purpose that it actually says it's in business to deliver. So that's our
Well, and
starting point.
that's mission critical because purpose is also continuity.
Yes.
It gives you a North Star. And if every 4 years you've got a different, I don't know why I said 4 years, because companies, it's even 3 years, right? But every 3 years, the CEO changes, and all of a sudden we have a different purpose. So what happens with that? So we could don't have all the time to teach everybody on the incredible depth of things you're doing. But if I understand it, what you're really trying to do is to create a foundational, transformational paradigm for management. And you're doing it three different ways, and I want to touch on that. And the first one is education. So tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do with Said's school at Oxford University and you have a program coming up. So yes, go ahead, tell us.
Oxford was our core academic partner for many years, for about 14 years. We actually had an economics of mutuality laboratory embedded in the Said Business School for years. A number of key people that we worked with there, including the dean and Colin Mayer, both retired. And so we started to focus also on other university partnerships, but we still have been teaching economics of mutuality at the executive education level every year. In fact, our spring program just graduated a course a few months ago, and basically, we look at education in two different ways. One is that you've got to get existing business leaders to unlearn something so that they can actually learn something new. And it's very hard to crack that nut because you stand where you sit. And if all the other business schools in the world are teaching one form of value creation, which is profit maximization for shareholders, Milton Friedman, and nobody else is, then you're going to come out into your business, and your competitors are also extracting as much value as they can and creating as much profit as they can for their shareholders. So what incentive do you have to actually start thinking differently? So we try to show business leaders that there's a different way, that you can actually expand your definition of performance to include all four forms of capital.
Yeah,
You
please
get
say
it,
them again. This is really
expand.
important, folks.
You could expand your
Capital is
definition.
just not just money.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Please
right.
tell us four again.
There are non-financial forms of capital that are taught in the management literature, but for some reason, they don't play a role in this kind of 1.0 version of capitalism called financial capitalism, which just focuses on financial capital, money. There's also social capital, which is about trust, social cohesiveness, the capacity to work collectively within a community that isn't financial in nature, but actually can have a significant impact on your balance sheet, one way or the other. Whether you create social capital in your business activity or where you deplete it, you will see improvements or drags on your top and bottom line, your P&L. So these things are inherently connected with each other, but businesses don't typically know how to measure, manage, and mobilize social capital, so they leave that value on the table. That value is one of the things we harness for economics of mutuality, just like human capital, which is also measurable, manageable, and you mobilize it for value creation. And this is really about the individual well-being in the workplace. And it's about identifying what really matters to the employees of a company based on what they were attracted to work for that corporate culture. And actually, there's significant benefits for performance when you can improve the well-being of your workforce by understanding first what they really care about. And if you can do that, you get things like talent attraction. Okay, well, we're in a war for talent around the world in business. And so the best and the brightest, where they go, you typically have a more successful business. So you've got an advantage, a competitive one, if you can actually attract the better talent. If you retain the better talent, which is also a benefit of operating this way, you also get a significant benefit on your performance because it's the best and brightest that leave first because it's easier for them to find another job than it is for others. And so if they're not motivated, if their purpose in life, if their greater calling isn't connected to the business and its purpose, if they don't see that the business is walking the talk of the values that it spouses, then they're probably going to go, and that's going to drag your business down as well. And then the third is optimized performance. People who have a great well-being in the workplace, they feel connected from a purpose perspective, they just tend to perform much better. And then natural capital is more about how can you leverage different understanding about the different metrics that account for most of the natural resources that your company uses to create anything. There's ways in which you can start to get insights through this approach to manage your natural capital inputs in a more efficient fashion where you can create more value but leave a smaller footprint in doing it. And that's what we call a leading indicator, something that would be an inputs kind of approach to natural capital creation that most companies ignore because they're focused on external benchmarking and reporting, which are lagging indicators. They're more about measuring up to the rest of the world, and that would be things like your carbon footprint, which is great for some purposes in business, but not to drive your business model in a different direction. You need really to harness the power of your natural capital understanding.
And you know, it's so interesting to me, again, how politics conflate things. You know, the planet is just better business. I
Yes.
remember, I'm old enough to remember, and I was a kid then, but a friend of mine's daddy was a very rich guy. He owned Hudson Pulp and Paper, great big, anyone in the Northeast remembers Hudson Napkins. Well, anyway, he was a liberal man, but when he heard about the Environmental Protection Agency, he went ballistic. He was all, what? You're going to make me buy all this equipment? He was all against it. Well, I saw him 10 years later after I graduated from college, and I said, David, so whatever happened about that? Best thing that ever happened to us. Forced us to revamp everything. Our productivity went way up. Our community relationships went way up. And we got rid of all a bunch of low-level competitors who wouldn't invest in it. So so really this next big message from this before we move on, folks, this is just better business. It's a systematic approach based on purpose because profits are the blood, but they're not the life, right? So
May I say a bit about purpose before we move on?
please, it's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people understand how business looks at purpose. If you talk to most CEOs today, I think they confuse profit with purpose, and they think, okay, our purpose is to make as much profit as possible. Again, as I said earlier, that's not really a purpose. But most other companies, they tend to look at purpose in two ways. One is either it describes what it is they're doing, which isn't really deliverable as strategy. It doesn't change anything. Or they create some sort of value statement that the company stands for this. And by doing so, they're kind of shining a light on themselves and on their value system. And somehow that's going to get people to buy more of their product. Well, when we look at purpose, we try to make it actionable. And there was a professor at Oxford many years ago that I followed his writings. It was over 120 years ago. His name was Clive Staples Lewis, and C.S. Lewis, as he was known to many, he said something about purpose, which was purpose is like a light, and you don't turn on a light in a dark room to stare at the light. You stare at what the light illuminates, and that's precisely the way we use economics of mutuality. We create a purpose that solves an external problem. We use that as a light on the ecosystem to illuminate the problems that the stakeholders that you've gathered together to help you deliver your purpose, what problems they're facing. And then the company, instead of just extracting value from them, is looking at how can we help, maybe through some low cost interventions, just a couple, could we solve some of these pain points for our key ecosystem stakeholder partners that have been lit up, by this light of purpose. And by doing so, can we create a much more effective, performant ecosystem around delivering that purpose? And we find that it works every time. And it winds up delivering not only holistic value, but it delivers financial value as well.
Now, we don't have time to cover all. This is obviously an educational program that you folks can access. You can go to eom.org and you will find there's a program coming up, I believe, next month. And so I encourage you folks to explore that. Now let's move on to something I'm really, really interested in, I would love to collaborate in any way. And this is the idea of proving it in the marketplace.
Yes.
Proving these concepts in the marketplace. And some people might be familiar with what KKR is doing in terms of employee ownership in private equity. And Jay, I'm an enormous believer that private equity, I have seen it destroy company after company. I worked for an employee-owned company that was bought by one of the best private equity companies. I will not mention them. They were at their time they destroyed it within 6 years. Destroyed a 107-year-old company. Why? They extracted value. I've always thought the enormous opportunity for private equity is to do what you folks are doing, and so I want to hear it. And that is to demonstrate that if you actually go in and you create a clear purpose and you harmonize the interests of all your stakeholders toward a real purpose, that's the better way to create value, because when you sell it again, you're giving somebody a basis for more value creation rather than a disaster waiting to happen.
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, well, when we spun out of Mars, after working on this for about 14 years inside the company allowed us to spin out and become an independent foundation, nonprofit that owns a for-profit consultancy, but the profit goes back into the company or as dividends to the foundation in theory, because it doesn't have shareholders. And about maybe 3 years in to our time outside of the company, outside of Mars as an independent entity, we saw an opportunity actually to add another entity that would actually be private equity investment arm of what it was we're doing, because we're looking for ways to accelerate the uptake of economics and mutuality. As we use the consulting approach through our Mutual Value Labs company based in Switzerland, it's very challenging for us to go into a company one by one and create meaningful change that actually can create a critical mass across a whole industry, for example. And so we're thinking that private equity actually could give us a leg up and allow us to acquire with a majority stake companies that then we can put in the right leadership team, the right strategy, the right board, create the right purpose, and help drive these companies forward in a more mutual value creation kind of approach. How do you do more good at a profit rather than how do you do less bad at a cost? That's kind of how we look at the stakeholder capitalism space. Most companies are working in the latter. How do you do less bad at a cost? We want to kind of equip the companies that we're acquiring with the ability to do more good, but at a profit in ways that scale. So we're still very early on, as I mentioned. Our first foray into this space was about 2 years ago, I want to say, when we acquired two mid-cap healthcare companies that were more healthcare advocacy and IT related. So they're helping with the healthcare journey and with the whole IT disaster that is healthcare data. And we merged those two companies together, and we're trying to figure out how we can significantly improve those companies in many different ways, including their value and their return on investment to those investors who are our limited partners. We're the general partner of that. And now we're actually on the verge of being able to announce something pretty significant. I can't really share exactly what it is yet, but I'll share the concept. Is that in Asia, we're partnering with the sovereign wealth fund of a large Asian country, I'm sorry, and also with a large private equity firm in that country that we're raising a couple of $100 million initially to create something called a mutual value fund. And we're going to be the GP, and we're going to manage the direction of that fund. It'll be a mixed private equity and venture fund. So we'll be buying companies, majority stakes through PE, and through venture capital, we'll be buying investment stakes in companies. And then the idea is to be able to bring our mutual value labs and its approach to mutual value creation into the companies that this fund is going to acquire at a much larger kind of level as we grow that number higher and higher. And so we're just about to announce that we've closed on that mutual value fund, and it'll take us in a newer direction in this space. So there's
Well,
a
that's
lot to
huge.
prove
And I'm only
still.
watching the clock here. That is huge news, and you're going to tell us about it. I bet I know the country, but I'm not going to say. But they have great food there. Anyway, but here's the mutual value labs we'll talk about. That's your consulting arm, and that's for companies that say, okay, this is an alternative to an Accenture, right? It's a different type of advisory firm that will help you take the principles of mutuality that you might have learned at the Said School and embed it into your organization. I want to leave room for loneliness, but is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. The idea of mutual value labs, though, is not to take an end-to-end business model innovation and say, okay, you need to swallow this whale to be a good company that does good. What we try to do is really listen to the company, and like your TQM, really listen and understand where each company is on their purpose journey, and then look for the right point of entry. And then we typically start small with a business unit, and then next thing you know, you're on project 7, so project 8, as they start to see the value of what it is you're doing, and you bring more and more of these practices into the company. So that's typically how we work. And then the case studies that come out of that fuels our work with educational institutions and others.
So then, folks, if you think about it, here is probably, and I know every organization in this space, Just Capital, everybody who touches on it. And I think we can honestly say that your organization is the most strategic and comprehensive and well-funded to be able to actually develop an educational program that's scalable internationally and based on the principles of mutuality, which, again, we could talk about nomenclature in a minute as we conclude, because we all want to work together toward this. And terminology has been a big problem. What do you call it, right? And when I say 2Q, I just use TQM to help people understand it's been done for decades. That's all. It's the stakeholder approach. We're not inventing something, nothing new under the sun. But so we've got obviously the education effort. You're gonna prove it in the private equity markets, and that's gonna take time. You're gonna be working for a while, Jay. And then finally, folks, if your company, is really bought into this, they can help you on your journey. So tell us about loneliness. What's that about?
Yeah, we actually decided about a year ago to launch a platform that we call Business Versus, and it's really trying to codify how we work with businesses to solve big problems of society and the environment, very specific ones. And we don't decide for the clients what it is that they should be solving. We let the clients decide for us where they need help in solving a big problem. So where is it that they want to play? So there's a large beer manufacturer actually that owns a lot of the brands in Central Europe that's called Asahi, and it's based in Japan.
Of
And
course.
Asahi became one of our clients pretty long ago now, and a really good client. And we were helping them in many different ways. And one day they said, we really feel like, especially in the kind of post-COVID era, where loneliness as a mental health issue was really exacerbated, many people turn to alcohol. And so we feel a responsibility in this space to do something positive for loneliness. How can you help us do that? So we started working with Asahi. We helped them create some interventions, understand the stakeholder ecosystem, what problems they could address, and then took the data from that, along with some data from another large multinational we were working with that also wanted to solve loneliness. We partnered with kind of the world's leading academic, Pamela Qualter, on loneliness studies, who's based at Manchester University in the UK. We put all this together into a report. We gave it away for free. We're running webinars and also workshops and symposiums in London at the moment. The next one is in late October for businesses that want to address this loneliness issue in a very meaningful way. And we're showing them how we've done it with others and how we can help them do it in their own companies. But then there's a whole set of other problems that we're working with companies on that are things like aging demographics, financial exclusion, even in the area of environmental degradation with deforestation. And we're looking to position business versus those issues as well as we go forward, and the work we do with those other companies becomes more mature, and we can take that data and just show others how companies that want to solve these big problems are doing it very practically and in ways that benefit the company, not just solve the problem.
Well, you know what's so funny, and this is real proof of it as we come to a conclusion here. Frankly, when I saw this loneliness thing, to be honest with you, I thought, where are these guys going? What? Because it's an enormous problem, okay? But what does that have to do with EOM, right? And don't, again, enormous problem. But I think of that for our religious institutions and schools. But you know what? Business. In fact, I want to do some other separate coverage on this because I think it's a business opportunity solving loneliness. And I think businesses play an enormous role because I have personally, in fact, I just ran into one of my former employees in front of a restaurant who told her new husband how the wonderful community we had built for all of our employees. And she was bragging and how she was still in touch with them. She'd become best friends with some of the people, blah, blah, blah. And you know how that made me feel? But you know what? She also told her husband how motivated everybody was. They loved going to work because it was their family. And if we succeeded, so you know what? I am totally sold. And battling loneliness is not only good, I think it's a moneymaker for companies.
Yeah, and we have to really get off of our moral high horses and think that, oh, if businesses are making money from solving these problems, then somehow that's evil. I look at it as these problems are not getting solved by nonprofits and they're not getting solved by governments. So businesses are the ones that actually could solve these problems, but they have to be motivated to do it. And so that you can be motivated by a lot of things, but I think showing that solving these big problems can actually not be a cost center. It can actually be a profit center. Again, it's not a bad thing if you're solving the problems.
And if I'm measuring it, and by the way, this is a great, the biggest problem in the thing that you and I've been at this since 1989, as publisher of a magazine that focused on people, back a trade magazine. And we're not much, in my view, and that's my last question to you, we're not that much further along than we were. In fact, I think we fell back. I think we were making progress during the 80s with the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. The real Ronald Reagan was the one who first awarded that award, where people were really viewed as a source of value creation. And I think that whole go-go era, personally, of the 90s, focused on, greed is good and value extraction. And it's taken all this time, Jay. So I'm going to let you, I'll let you say where you think
Okay.
we are in the inning. But you know what's going to, in the game, let's say. But this, in my view, is what's going to change it, the work you're doing. Not just the education work, and I'm helping do this work too. We created the first mock ETF back in 2012, 6-year longitudinal study that way outperformed the S&P 500 using completely transparent metrics. And then that led to a lot of good copycats. So what's going to change it, Jay, is what you're doing,
Mhm.
proving that it's just better business, right? Isn't that? We're not going to do it by the moral violin. We're not going to convince the CEO she's going to go to heaven. No, it's going to be better for their shareholders in the end of the day. Isn't that the argument?
And your voice is so critical to this as well, Bruce. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, I would just say very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, that my knowledge of all this really started just before the 2008 global economic crisis. That was a real watershed, actually, in getting business leaders to realize there's something wrong with financial capitalism in its 1.0 form, that there needed maybe to be a more complete form of capitalism. In fact, I co-authored a book with the former chief economist of Mars, who was leading this program for some time, called Completing Capitalism, Heal Business to Heal the World, to try to address this. But when we first started this work, nobody thought that there was something wrong with financial capitalism. So it was a hard sell. I was glad we were inside a privately held company, a family-owned company that thought long-term. Well, the global economic crisis really helped to open the door for us to get more receptivity, to get the right kind of academic partnerships, and to start to get the right places that we could pilot proof of concept kind of experiments on this. Well, as we started to build more and more of the case, we started to really get a strong foothold, and then suddenly we get this COVID effect, where a lot of corporate leaders were just looking at, they were moved into survival mode. Some of those corporate leaders actually rose above that and realized, well, to survive, we have to do business in a different way. We can't just keep doing things the way we used to. But by and large, a lot of the companies did away with their discretionary spending. Anything that didn't look like profit maximization, they didn't want to touch. I think we started to come out of that in the post-COVID era, but now there's still shifts. And I think some of the shifts are the fact that there are things like ESG, which started off with great intentions, but ultimately became a compliance exercise, checking boxes, something that is causing, it doesn't create value. It's more about how do you get companies to comply. And so CFOs and shareholders started to rebel against that. We see that in Asia, especially now in the US, very strongly. They want to see, well, what creates value rather than just checking boxes and raising our awareness. And so
Or
people
virtue
are kind of
signaling.
stepping in.
Virtue signaling was the other
Virtue
thing.
signaling, exactly. So we have to get beyond this current wave of the negative pendulum reaction against the virtue signaling and go back to where we started in our own work, which was this can't be altruistic. It's got to be good for the business. Otherwise, Mars would have killed it in the beginning. Now we're independent, and we really have to show that that's the case. It's good for business to succeed, and that's what you said.
So to conclude, again, we have an international audience, but I'll use baseball. They're 9 innings for those of you who don't know that. Uh, what inning are we in this pledge toward transforming capitalism to focus on value creation rather than offloading costs onto society?
Well, I'm a born optimist, and I've also had a chance to see now the full spectrum of all of this. And I would say we're probably in the fifth inning. Maybe some would say we've slipped back to earlier part in the game, but the fifth inning feels about right, because I think now we have enough data to demonstrate that this actually works. And so it doesn't have to just be companies that are willing to take big risks to do this, or shareholders that are really willing to give up profits for impact. No, this can be for everyone, but we've got to communicate it. That's the biggest obstacle that we have now, which is why I love going on shows like yours, because people just need to know there is another way. There's a better way, that it's tested. There's a body of case studies now that's growing that shows it's a superior form of value creation, this kind of approach. And part of what we have to do is put away our ego and our brand and partner with others that are in this space so that we can communicate with one another's followings, our audiences.
So
And that's
that's,
the
you
thing I want to
mentioned,
do. It's not
I'm
all
going to
about
take 4
EOM.
minutes. Nope, you said that you wanted to, and we're having a little technical problem here, but this will be in print also. You said that part of your objective was to get more people working together on a common
Yes.
voice. And let's end with that. What do you, of course, you know, we're going to promote everything you do. What are you trying to do to, we call it I call it stakeholder capitalism. You call it economics of mutuality. I think it doesn't matter, but how do we get more unity here?
Yeah, the one biggest form of discouragement I guess I've experienced in this space is that I see so many potential partner organizations out there that are so caught up in wanting to push their brand specifically that they're missing out on the opportunity to work collaboratively because we all have a different piece of the solution here. None of us has the whole solution, and if we could go on a kind of a journey of humility and co-creation, that we could collaborate together, that we're going to achieve much more. And so one of the things that I'm helping to co-found is something called the Global Alliance for Conscious Business Education. I came across a group of professors that came out of the conscious capitalism movement in the US, but they were European based mostly. And they really wanted to create their own organization that would create a business school curriculum, but around what they call conscious business principles, which actually are very well aligned with purpose and what it is we're trying to deliver with economics and mutuality. But where I saw that we could provide a missing piece of what they're doing is they could provide the theory in the curriculum and we could provide the data and how you do it practically. And so together we're creating this global alliance for conscious business education that we're hoping to really use to transform what is taught in management schools around the world. And so
Wow, what a
creating centers,
headline.
we're creating centers of excellence through economics and mutuality, but I want to open those to the global alliance and bring in more of those professors, get them working collaboratively across geographies and institutions to bring these learnings forward. All of
Folks,
them.
a lot of exciting things to look forward to. Jay, thank you so much. This will be published next week in our newsletters. And again, I thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Bruce, for all you're doing.